안녕하세요. Joyce입니다. 감사합니다. We are quite concerned in places like Afghanistan, in Ukraine. What will happen to winterization challenges for people in need? But we cannot lose hope.
You have experience in Korea for 3 years.
Correct.
And I believe Korean is one of the giving people in the world and quite generous people. And at the same time, Korea is so competitive society and divided society. And I wonder, what is your expectation to the Korean people in coping with this global the humanitarian crisis? Because you have quite a perspective on the Korean people, their strengths and their weakness.
I mean, I think for me, let me step back and say, what did I appreciate? Because now I've had a time since I left Korea and I've had a time to look back. What I appreciated about Korea. One, as you rightly pointed out, is the kindness, the generosity, the willingness to share. I mean, I know about kalbi and different types of cuisines and the beautiful Korean soups because I was invited to dinners. So I think the spirit of giving, taking that globally, think about the humanitarian space, is a gift. Korea is a very safe country. I mean, when I was here as a mother, I never worried about my children taking the metro or biking to school. That is the aspiration globally. We would like to see a more peaceful and a safer world. Yeah. Technology. Korea is well endowed, as imperfect as it may be, with innovation and transformation. A lot of technology have started here. And this is a country that just in the 50s was in war. So imagine taking that talent and technology abroad, whether it's to make that transportation of a food truck convoy from one point to another easier.
I see.
Yeah. So I think for me, I'm very, very hopeful. And relatively speaking, Korea is in a much better space compared to a number of countries.
What's the visibility of Korea in the global scene in this humanitarian sector nowadays?
I think we need to do more. I mean, my aspiration, if I could be honest, Koreans have been very generous, giving money, but also ideas and civil society organizations in terms of giving, like the ones I recently met. I would like to see a stronger voice, a louder voice of Korea, for example, in our humanitarian country teams, and leaning in to say, this is what we can share from Korea. My aspiration also is to see more Korean nationals being involved in humanitarian work. It's not easy, but there are some spots where they can really contribute. So to attract more Korean nationals to join humanitarian work, because it builds on the spirit of giving that I saw when I lived here.
So you expect more contribution in the field of this humanitarian crisis also,
yes,
right?
And not just money contribution. I actually think money is not as important as ideas, as bringing different perspectives to change how, for example, the humanitarian community may work. Money is one part of the story. It's very important, but it's not the only part of the story.
You must have a lot of experience visiting the field of humanitarian crisis. And in your recent visit to this humanitarian crisis area, could you share something, your story that you really I mean, very touching and something that you cannot forget?
So very recently, about last month actually, I was in Yemen. And I spent 9 days in Yemen. The memorable thing, and I talked about me being a mother, of course, and a wife as well. I traveled 6 hours on the road to go and visit internally displaced women who, I met 4 of them. 2 had moved from one camp to another 4 times. So imagine living in plastic camps and moving with your children and transplanting the family in a different camp. And these are camps with no toilets, made out of plastic. And I wanted to visit their homes. So they invited me to their houses. We sat on the floor, their mothers like me, and I asked them, what are your aspirations? And they live in some of the most poor places I've ever been, and I've traveled a lot. And what these 2 women, Khadija in particular, told me was that she wishes school for her children, healthcare services for her children and her family. When I visited her, she only had a tomato for the whole day because that's the only thing she could get. But even despite all of that, she wanted to offer me tea. And for me, what is touching is the kindness from a woman who doesn't have anything, literally staying under a plastic tent, but the spirit of giving. Let me give you tea to welcome you to my house. I think the other aspect is her aspiration. I mean, when I was here, even now in the States, what I want is the best education for my children. She had the same aspiration as me, as a mother. Health services. Whenever we have moved with my family, my number 1 priority was, are there good hospitals in case my children get sick? She wishes the same thing. So I think for me, the touching part is how as human beings we are connected, more so than we're indifferent. We want the same thing for our families and kids. And that touched me. I see.
Working in this area of humanitarian sector, it's not an easy job. We have to go to the field and we have to sometimes spend a few months and for a long time. What is driving you to work in this area, even though there's a lot of difficulties?
So let me share with you my perspectives about what drives me. Whether when I was working in development or environment or now humanitarian. You're absolutely right. It's very hard work. I think for me is the desire, strong desire, to make a difference in this world. I always think about when I'm very old and I'm looking back at my life, would I say that I have done something meaningful to contribute to this world? So what keeps me going is the noble desire to make a difference, whether it's in development or climate or now humanitarian. I think the other aspect, especially after becoming a mother, is to say, if my children ask me when they're older, Mommy, what did you do during your generation? What would I tell them? Did I try to do something meaningful for them? So I feel I have an obligation for my children as well. That's why I went to climate, and now I'm in humanitarian. And there is nothing more rewarding as a gift than that for me as a mother.
Yeah.
I think the last part is, in all these places that I have traveled, and whenever I think about the 6 hours I traveled, for me it was one trip to Yemen. But the humanitarian workers on the ground, they do this in and out. So how privileged I am to actually support them as well. So those are the things that give me a clear sight of what I want to do.
And in Korean, young people are really interested in making a difference in the global context also, not just in the local the horizon. And for this young generation who wants to make a difference beyond the humanitarian, this area, you have quite extensive experience in these international organizations. And what's your tips or expectation to the young Korean generation?
So,
I mean, their contribution, what kind of contribution? You just mentioned the Korea has a great asset. And I think this, especially the young generation, may have something they can add.
I'm a mother of young generation. I have two, but and one of my kids actually graduated from high school here in Korea. What I appreciated as a mother, what I saw in her, which I think demonstrates something unique about Korea, is work ethic. She used to study with her Korean friends until 2 a.m. I think one thing that Korean young people can bring is hard work, spirit globally. Because doing humanitarian work, saving lives, takes a lot of work. And Korean young people can do it. I think the second is innovation. You look at how young Koreans use KakaoTalk, for example. How they think, especially the Generation Z, about technology. So imagine bringing that talent outside Korea. I think I would also say doing uncomfortable things. You know, if I look at my own career, I worked at the World Bank Group, I worked at the United Nations Environment Program, now I'm with humanitarian. One has to take a bit of risks. You leave your parents behind, you go and work somewhere else because you develop a leadership muscle. But also you understand the world very differently. If I look at myself because I lived here, I have a very different understanding of Korean culture, values, but also what is important in this society. And that brings a certain degree of humility. But also it challenges your own biases, you know. After living with people, then you realize, maybe my perspective was A. But after living and engaging with others, you say, maybe you should change to B. And that's what makes this world a better place.
I see.
Yeah. Do it.
Do it?
I would say do it. Again, I go back to what I talked about Korea. I think we need nationals from different countries within the UN system. The UN system is a membership of 190 plus members, Korea being one of them. I really think the beauty of working for organizations like the UN are twofolds, mainly. One is to do something bigger than yourself, to get this sense of rewarding that it's not just about me, it's about making life better out there. And there is something deeply rewarding about that. I think the other thing, what I have learned, you work with colleagues from different parts of the world. And if you take that opportunity to challenge yourself, to grow by learning from your colleagues, you actually become a better person.
People from different backgrounds you're learning from.
Exactly.
By working together. Right?
Exactly. And then you realize, wow, I didn't know this. I've learned from my colleague from Spain or from a certain country. So it makes you a better person. Even better, it makes you a better leader. It's like a muscle that you develop when you go to the gym.
Yeah.
Or you climb mountains.
There must be some, always there's a gap between the reality and fantasy sometimes. And you have highlighted the bright side of this working with the international organization. What is the other side of this bright aspect?
Okay, you know, there's no perfect place. So I'm going to be very honest about the not so good part. I think one is because the United Nations or these multilateral organizations, they tend to be very, very big. Sometimes it's very frustrating dealing with bureaucracy.
I see.
Instead, when I lived here in Korea, I learned Pali Pali. When you work in international organizations, that spirit gets challenged because you have to bureaucracy slow things. I think two, you have to be patient but firm. Otherwise, you won't deliver results. Because you're working, I'll give you a very simple example. As part of being a UN staff, you work in a melting pot of cultures and different work styles.
Yeah.
So I may be very structured, but my team may not be very structured. So how do I bring them without punishing them to achieve the same goal, but making them feel good? Yeah. So patience is another one because it can be very frustrating. I think the other is being open to being challenged, because we are wired by the time you become an adult. Yeah, to be flexible.
Open to
you've been
whatever.
molded a different way and it's very difficult to change habits. So those are not so good. Yeah. Yeah.
What's your greatest source of hope?
For me, it's the young generation.
Young generation.
Honestly, the young generation. I mean, if I look at my own children and how they look at the world very differently with no guardrails, that gives me hope that the world that they will grow up in will be much, much better. If I look at their innovation, what they do with their computers compared to what I struggle with, I mean, for me, it's the young generation. Also, how politically involved they are. Because sometimes
they are quite active in joining these political activities. Right?
But also to vote, to know what the power of voting. So, for example, recently my children are American citizens, how they were using social media to tell their friends, please go and vote. To make changes for a better world. So for me, it's the young generation that gives me hope.
So you are quite optimistic about the future, right?
I'm impatient, optimistic.
Impatient, but optimistic at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think to work in, whether it's development or climate change, now humanitarian, you have to be optimistic. I'm very optimistic. But I'm also optimistic, as I told you, even after visiting Yemen, to see the resilience in people who have gone through so much, they have suffered so much, and yet they are so giving. Yeah. So that absolutely gives me hope.
So as a mother and as a parent of young people, what kind of questions what kind of questions do they ask you at home? Nowadays, if you are, when you have to travel a lot because of these great, important responsibilities, and they must have some dissatisfaction.
What I find is my young adults, so my daughter is 23, my son is almost 19. They're my strongest critic. Strongest critic.
The objective opinion.
Yes, for example, let me give you a specific example. If they see that my Twitter account, they follow me on Twitter, that I'm posting things that are not really making a difference, they will pick up the phone and call me and say, Mommy, no, you should not.
You are not doing enough.
Yeah, so in a way they ground me, to be very honest. They bring me back to my lane to say, you are saving lives and this is what you need to know. For the COP, they were asking, what is OCHA doing for climate change? So I had to talk to my boss and say, between one of us, we have to go to Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, for the COP. So he went. So I think they ground me.
I see. So it's not public opinion, or it's not your colleague in the office, but your children at home are the greatest critic and at the same time greatest supporter.
And
for your work, right?
And they're my moral compass. They also bring me to what is important in life. But also, I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's the desire for me to be accountable to them, to say, you know, mommy did her bit to make this world a better place. But of course, you know, Christmas is coming, so what they ask is a little bit of money for shopping.
But you just mentioned that now the young generation is somehow leading our ways of this older generation, right? Parents.
Yes.
They are, I mean, leading sometimes. And do you see this is one of the source of hope that they are playing an important role? Because they are more objective in a way, rather than their previous generations.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, I think it's a leadership trait. I'll give you an example. Our kids, a couple of years ago, they decided that we should not have any plastics in the house. So they changed our habits and also the choices. We had to have metal straws rather than plastic. And there is something to be said about young people when they tell you with their honesty, without biases, and you look at them and say, you know what, they are right. Sometimes we may not admit it, but then we go and change. I think they hold us to account, and I think for me, that is a key leadership trait for young people. And think about most of the private companies globally in the world, I mean, with few exceptions, the mid and upper level management, they're young people. So even when you think about decisions, where to invest, where not to invest in the private sector, these are the future CEOs.
Yeah, I see the great somehow similarities that I have also great admiration and expectation and hope for the young new generation. And I believe you have the similar sentiment, right?
I do. Yes, I do. I do.
I found the similarities between you and me.
Yes, and also hope. You and me have hope. Yeah.